Aiming and controlling recoil in PUBG on a controller can be incredibly challenging, whether you're new to the game or even if you've been playing for years. Unlike most other console shooters, there is absolutely no aim assist on PUBG Console, making it very hard to master, but there are a few tips and tricks that I wanted to share with you as a day one player myself that can make your life a lot easier. Today, we're going to look at how you can adjust your own settings to lock onto targets, what different methods of aiming you should be using in different situations, how you can make recoil easier to handle, and finally, some practice drills that you can use to hone your skills. I'll put time codes for all the sections in the video description down below, and don't forget to check out my YouTube and Twitch live streams for more tips or to ask me any questions that you might have. So first up, we're going to talk about your settings in the game and how you can adjust those to make aiming and recoil control easier. I'm going to demonstrate some of this in the aiming and sound lab within the training mode on PUBG. If you're not familiar with the aim sound lab and how to get in there, if you go into the map when you're in training mode and then highlight any of these areas that can go yellow and click the right stick, you'll instantly teleport to them. If you want to go into the aiming sound lab, then you just need to find the one that says aim sound lab. There's actually a couple around. It doesn't make any difference where you go. Find this area here, click the right stick on it, and we'll teleport straight in. So something I wanted to cover today that I think makes aiming in PUBG a lot easier is running a medium to high general sensitivity setting and then quite a low ADS sensitivity. By ADS, I mean your 1x essentially, or really any of these ones below 1x for your higher range scopes. The one that says aiming sensitivity here is actually your over the shoulder aiming, and we're not going to worry about that for just a moment. If you want to deep dive into all of my settings and custom controller bindings, then go check out my separate settings video. I'll put a link up in the corner. So I run general sensitivity on 12, and that's the setting basically when you're not aiming or doing anything, you're just standing like this and looking around. That is the sensitivity of this movement. The higher you have that, the quicker it's going to move, and the lower, the slower. Really, the goal is to have this as high as you can possibly have it while still being under control. And what I like to pair this with is a lower ADS sensitivity, aim down sights. So this is my 1x optic, this is my iron sights, or my red dot, or my hollow, which I have on 7. And by having this low and my general high, what this means is when I'm aiming at targets, rather than what you might see some players doing who run high ADS, and some people do it very well, but what they'll tend to do is they'll stay in this aim and they'll be looking around in ADS as they go between targets. But you can see for me here, this is pretty slow and not really a practical option. And what I do when I'm aiming between targets is I use my general to look around, and then I ADS in when I get to the target I want to shoot at, kind of like this. Now, the reason I think this is a really good method to try and get used to, particularly if you find you're struggling with your aim. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of players running all sorts of different styles of sens that do very, very well. But this video isn't aimed at people who are already absolutely cracked. This is for people who maybe want some guidance on their aiming. Now, why I find this useful is because essentially when you go into your ADS, then it's a bit lower than your general sens. That actually kind of puts brakes on your movement. So if I pull up some targets here and begin shooting them, you can start to see what I mean by this. So if I just try and look between these targets just in general without aiming in, I've got it on 12. It's quite hard, it's quite twitchy, I've got it quite sensitive, and trying to stop it on these two targets is quite tricky. The higher you have this, the harder it's going to be. I do find it quite good for looking around like this, but if I'm trying to go between these two targets without aiming, quite hard. But if I go between these two targets and actually ADS, then the effect of going into the aim down sights actually slows down your sensitivity slightly, and it essentially puts a brake on what you're doing. So I find this quite an effective way, spinning across the screen quickly, and then you're essentially slamming down the left trigger to put on the brakes as you get near the target you want to shoot. So just to show you this in action for a little bit, this is just a little warm-up routine I sometimes do in the training room before I start streaming or before a PUBG session. And shooting these targets can be a really good way both to practice your PUBG skills, but also to just warm up before you get stuck in for a session. Even just doing this for 2 or 3 minutes, 2 or 3 runs of this, I find could be really, really useful for your PUBG. But you can see what I mean by that general and ADS thing. I'm coming out of my aim and then going back in on each of the targets. And this is how I play PUBG in general. I don't spin around with my scope aimed in, particularly maybe if I was transferring between 2 very close targets like this, then I wouldn't bother. But generally, pretty much any target, I'm going to move and then reposition my aim using my general sens and then zoom back in. I'd really recommend giving this a go. You don't have to use exactly my settings, but I do find having general a bit higher than your ADS and then using this kind of technique for aiming is a really good way to play the game. Another useful setting to consider is your vertical sensitivity multiplier. And essentially changing this affects how much pushing up and down on the right stick will make your character look up and down. And what this also means is how much you have to push the stick up or down to counter recoil. So if I turn this up to max, you can see that I'm now just completely wildly out of control because the tiniest little touch on my controller makes me look up and down very, very quickly. If I try and control recoil, you can see that it's a little bit weird. I keep pulling it down further than I should because I'm pushing the stick a tiny bit too much, and then it's just pushing my aim down. Now, I think this is one of the most important settings in the game for finding the sweet spot. I don't think there's a guaranteed special number that works for everyone, but I've been using 70 for quite a while. I think 70 gives a really nice balance where you have a good range of motion on the stick to try and counter recoil without it being overly sensitive, but it also gives you enough range to be able to counter as much recoil as you might need. Now, next up, I wanted to talk about the 3 different methods of aiming within PUBG and when you might want to use each different one. So to start with, we've already been talking about ADS, aim down sights, and that's whenever you're looking down a scope like this or your iron sights. It could be a red dot like that, or it could be a range scope like this one. Essentially, your ADS is your most used aim. That's going to be from anything from very, very long range, medium range, all the way up to relatively close range from about 10 yards, something like this. You're probably still going to be using ADS. Once you start to get within this kind of range, between sort of down to about 5 meters or closer, then I start to try and use over shoulder aiming, or soft aiming as I sometimes call it, which is where we hold LB for my controllers like this, and you can see it does the over shoulder aiming. You can't really see it very well in FPP, but it does still do it. TPP demonstrates it a little bit better. If we over shoulder aim, it's not quite as accurate. You see, if I stand back here and try and over shoulder aim, it's going to go all over the place, and if we were ADSing, we'd be able to cluster the shots much more nicely. But if we're actually up relatively close, then we can use this and still fire shots accurately enough to be able to hit targets at this kind of range. Why it's beneficial to use soft aiming when you're a bit closer into targets is for a couple of reasons. First of all, it gives you better peripheral vision because you're not as zoomed in. You can see more of what is going on in the area around you, and I feel it also gives you a bit more freedom of movement to strafe around and move while you're shooting as well. If you're using an SMG, you can often get away with soft aiming from a lot further away, even as far back as maybe 10 meters. I'd probably still consider soft aiming sometimes if I was using a JS9 or an UMP or other SMG in the game. ARs tend to be a little bit less accurate and reliable with hip fire and soft aiming, so just keep that in mind when you're using these types of aiming. So that's ADS and soft aim, or over the shoulder covered, and the last one is going to be hip fire, which we're going to use for our super close range encounters. Again, I'll leave this in TPP so you can see this a bit better, but basically what I would always do if I was fighting someone essentially basically point blank, I would always be hip firing them. Now, the reason for this is normally that I'm going to be using movement a lot when I'm super close to a target. If we imagine there's a target I'm fighting around this pillar, if I'm trying to ADS on them like this, then it kind of, you can see it moves me quite slowly if I'm trying to move sideways. If they step slightly to the side and they're moving loads, it's going to be very hard to track them with this kind of aim. Even soft aiming can be a bit of a struggle, but really what I tend to do is just completely hip fire. A lot of times you're pushing corners, pushing doorways, something like that, and you're fighting someone point blank, just charging round and hip firing. You're going to be more than accurate enough to hit them most of the time. As well as that, it gives you such a great freedom of movement. You can kind of dodge their shots. You can be the annoying one strafing, and if they're stood there trying to ADS you and you're strafing past them like this, then it's going to be very, very hard for them to kill you, and it's a really useful way to try and win close range engagements. I wouldn't use it much further away than a couple of yards, especially with an AR. SMGs, again, can be a bit more accurate with this, but ARs start to get very, very inaccurate from just 2 or 3 meters away. Pushing corners like that and strafing around people and moving past people and cutting back is a really, really nice way to fight these close range engagements, particularly if you have an SMG. They are absolutely brutal with their hip fire. Now, I just wanted to have a quick chat about ways you can reduce recoil in the game. I'm sure you're familiar to some degree with the various attachments you can use in the game that will reduce recoil. Muzzles such as the compensator or the flash hider both give recoil reduction. The tack stock and the cheek pad both also help reduce recoil, as well as all of the different hand grips in the game. I tend to use the half grip as my AR spraying grip of choice these days. A lot of people like to use the vert grip, which has more stronger vertical recoil control, and the thumb grip is also a really nice choice as it gives you fast ADS speed. I tend to run the thumb grip when I'm using something like an M4 where I don't need as much recoil reduction. Generally speaking, the half grip and the thumb grip and the vert grip are pretty decent for any kind of full auto spraying, and then the vert grip and the lightweight are going to be your best bet for single single tapping a DMR. Now we can see the difference in recoil reduction we get from adding attachments to a gun. If I take this barrel, for instance, and we just stand here and we spray this wall with no attachments whatsoever, we don't push the sticks at all, you can just see where the recoil naturally takes us. If we then shove this AR comp and this half grip on and we do the same thing, we'll be able to see a much tighter recoil pattern as this goes up the wall. But there's more we can do for that. If we then crouch down next to this one and then we fire from crouching, you can see that it's going to be even tighter still by quite a large margin. We did start slightly lower there, but you can see at the top there's still a big gap, big difference. And then proning again will give you an extra bonus to recoil, but it's worth knowing that it doesn't really give you as big a jump as going from standing to crouched. If we go full prone here and start shooting just to the side of this crouched one, you can see it does take a bit off, but most of the time I'd find going full prone and spraying is not really going to be worth it unless you're firing something like an LMG or sometimes a DMR at long range and you need that help with recoil. So what we learn here is that crouching can really give you a big difference in your recoil, and I'd recommend crouching as much as you can while spraying in this game. If you want some tips on making it easier to crouch, I use an Xbox Elite controller with a paddle on the back that I have bound to hold to crouch, and that means I find it really easy to go into ADS, crouch, and then uncrouch and un-ADS in one smooth movement pretty much every time I'm spraying. This is a really nice setup. You don't need to have a paddle to do it. It's just a little bit easier to do with that. And if you want full details on how to set that up, go and check out my settings video that I linked to down below. So with the right attachments, some crouching, and a good bit of practice, you should find yourself able to control recoil pretty effectively, even when you're firing something like a barrel or something that can be quite bouncy. Now, lastly, I wanted to run through some different training drills and warm-up routines that you can do in the training room in order to improve your skills and get yourself warmed up for a session. Even with all these tips, there's no substitute to practice, and the more you do it, the more you play, the better you're going to be. I tend to do some of these things for 5 to 10 minutes at the start of each stream, and it's definitely helped me get better and more consistent with my shooting in PUBG. So first up, what I like to do is do this little training mode in the aim and sound lab with whatever AR or full auto gun you want to use. And when I'm doing this, I'm not trying to be as 100% accurate as you could possibly be. I'm not trying to get the most amount of targets so I can compare with other people about how many targets they get. What I like to do is try and spray the targets as if you were spraying people in the game properly. You're not going to sit there trying to line up the perfect headshot on someone who is already firing at you. You're going to swing your aim over and you start praying, and you just kind of hope that your intuition is right and you're spraying near them, and you make micro adjustments to your aim to pull the target onto them. Also try and move around it. When I'm in here, I'll mix up crouching and standing up. I'll try and put a bit of over shoulder aim onto some of the closer targets, and then move around a bit when I'm reloading as well to put myself in a different position. And all of those kind of things, I think, make it a more realistic simulation of fighting enemies in the game rather than just standing there firing 2 single bullets into each head and trying to get 40 targets or something unrealistic like that. So another great little trick that I discovered recently is something you can use to do longer range practice on the targets in the aim and sound lab. So by default, you can't actually get out of this center zone. There's invisible walls that stop you jumping over here. But what you can now do, because of the zip line being added to the game, you can actually spawn this in by going to the spawn menu by holding down the back button or the map button, go to etc, and you can find the zipline gun here, and then under ammo you can then find the zipline wires, the gun cables that you need to use for it. If you then aim up at the rafters here, let it go yellow, fire a cable into this, and then fire another cable just into the side here or anywhere it will let you, and then you should just be able to press X and attach yourself to the zipline, and then you can actually zipline out of the middle bit. We can then go up here and press LB and RB to remove that zipline and get it out of the way. And what we can now do is go over here and press these buttons. You can actually press any of these buttons. It doesn't have to be the ones there, and it will start up the training routine even though we're not actually in the right bit. We can go all the way up here if we want. And you can see now we've got these targets from far away, and we can practice firing with our Dragunov, with a 6X, or with a sniper. You could practice your 6X sprays with an AR here, or whatever you want to do. This is really handy, and this is a fun little thing. You've only been able to do this since quite recently. The zipline was added not too long ago into the game. So as long as the zipline is around and available in training rooms, this is a nice little thing you can do. It's a shame you can't just walk out of the middle anyway, to be honest, because it'd be great to be able to do this longer range. But yeah, nice little hack. Would recommend giving this a go. Another nice way to warm yourself up and practice. Try popping heads with the DMR like the Dragonov. It can one-tap the headshots, and it's another quite nice way of trying to practice your aim. Couple more little routines I like to do. Just spraying between car tires here I find quite a nice one once I'm already warmed up a bit. They're just like nice little easy targets that you can just keep moving between and doing little sprays. Doing little sprays like this, quite an effective way of shooting. The longer you keep the button held down, the harder that recoil is going to be. So firing in short bursts like this is a really nice way to actually fire at people when you're struggling a little bit with your recoil and keeping your aim onto moving targets particularly. Right next to these cards, you can also find this little area where you can shoot targets, these green and red ones. Another nice one to go for, and just finding random ones that pop up that you want to shoot. Couple of shots, just spin them around. Nice way of just quickly putting yourself onto targets that you see. There's not really any method or pattern to this, just trying to find ones you want to hit. It's a nice way of just practicing shooting some moving targets after all the static targets we've just been doing. And again, another way of practicing for longer range and moving targets is going down to the 400-meter range here. You get all these moving targets. We can go here with our Dragonov and just start shooting some of these. There's all sorts of different range ones here. And it's a great little place for practicing those longer range shots, especially these targets further back. You can start to get used to the bullet lead you might need for different weapons, particularly stuff like the Dragonov that have slightly lower bullet velocity that you might need to get used to if you've not used them very much. And last but not least, if you want to practice your full auto sprays on some fast moving targets, then come down to the car shooting range, grab yourself an AR and try and shoot some of these targets here. These move pretty quickly, so it's a nice way of practicing tracking targets and controlling recoil, especially if you're using something a bit tougher like a barrel or an AK, and then you can just try and shoot these targets. It goes red when you're shooting them if you're hitting the driver's window. Otherwise, it's going to pop up with white, but another nice way of shooting moving targets. Some of them move pretty quick, as you can see here, and can be quite hard to hit. So that's everything for today. Hopefully, you found some of it useful. If you did, then drop a like and a sub, and why not check out my PUBG live streams, as well as my second YouTube channel, TBG Plays, where I upload daily PUBG gameplay videos. Thanks so much for watching. My name's Ben, we are the Beard Guys, and I'll see you next time. I just wanted to drop you all a quick message to tell you about our PUBG creator code. As a PUBG partner, we have a creator code which you can add to your account, which means whenever you purchase anything in game, PUBG will give us a commission. Whether you're buying season passes, G-Coin bundles, or anything else that requires cash in PUBG, if you have our code added, then you'll be helping us out without costing yourself a penny extra. It's a great way to support the channel, and it really does help keep us making PUBG content for you. Plus, it's easy to set up and you'll only ever have to do it once. To add our code, first visit accounts.pubg.com and then log in or create an account. Once you've logged in, connect your Xbox, PlayStation or Steam account on the linked accounts tab, then go to the Creator Appreciation Program section and type the Beard Guys into the box or find us from the drop-down list. Then just click submit and you're all done. A massive thank you to everybody who has used our code. Your support is absolutely vital for us and it really makes a huge difference.